The first time Lena saw Ethan, she thought he was everything she'd ever wanted. Polished, confident, and dazzling in a way that made her feel small, but special all at once. They met at a charity auction in her city, where she'd been volunteering as a coordinator. Ethan Lennox, CEO of a luxury real estate firm, had swept into the hall with the kind of ease that came from knowing you belonged everywhere. When his eyes met hers, she froze. And when he smiled, she thought, this is what forever looks like. Their romance moved fast. Ethan was intoxicating. Dinners at rooftop restaurants, weekend trips to Paris, gifts that made her heart race and her hands tremble. When he proposed, he did it in front of a crowd, slipping a diamond ring on her finger as everyone clapped. "You deserve the world," he'd whispered that night. She believed him, but the world Ethan gave her came with invisible walls. The first signs were subtle. At their engagement dinner, he gently corrected how she held her fork. "It's just, in my circle, people notice those things," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Later, when she wore her favorite floral dress to meet his friends, he said, "You're beautiful, but maybe next time something more elegant, less small town?" After the wedding, Lena moved into his glass mansion overlooking the city skyline. It was breathtaking but eerily silent. Everything gleamed: the marble floors, the metallic art pieces, the cold gray walls. Ethan had staff for everything: a housekeeper, a chef, a personal assistant. There was no space for imperfection, or for her. At first, she tried to fit in. She watched tutorials on etiquette and learned the difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy. She bought clothes that matched the elegant monotony of Ethan's world: beige, black, white. But no matter how she tried, something always seemed off. One evening, during a dinner with Ethan's business partners, she shared a story about her childhood, about helping her mother make candles and selling them at local fairs. Everyone laughed politely, except Ethan. He stared at her with the kind of look that chilled her to her bones. Later, when they were alone, he said, "You don't need to share humble stories like that. It makes people uncomfortable." That was the first night she cried silently in their luxury bedroom. The walls were tall, the curtains heavy, the sheets expensive, yet she'd never felt so small. Months passed, and the small comments turned into open criticism. "You're too emotional. You don't understand how people of our status live. Try not to embarrass me tonight." At charity galas, he spoke over her. At dinners, he introduced her as Lena, still learning the ropes of high society. The guests laughed softly, thinking it was a harmless joke. But every time, something inside her cracked. Even Ethan's mother joined the chorus. She would call Lena sweet in that patronizing tone, always followed by a dig. "I suppose you'll adjust eventually." Lena started spending hours walking through the empty hallways of their mansion, staring at her reflection in the glass windows. She barely recognized the woman staring back: sleek, quiet, restrained. Gone was the laughter, the spark, the warmth. She'd become a shadow in her own life. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was Ethan's company anniversary gala, a lavish event with hundreds of guests and flashing cameras. Lena wore a custom designer gown he had chosen, elegant but lifeless. As they mingled, she caught snippets of laughter, champagne glasses clinking, people praising Ethan's vision. Someone asked her what she did for a living, and before she could answer, Ethan laughed. "Oh, Lena doesn't work. She's still figuring out where she fits." The group chuckled. The sound of their laughter cut through her like glass. She forced a smile, her throat tight, and excused herself to the restroom. In the mirror, her mascara shimmered under the light. Not from tears yet, but from restraint. She could still hear his words echoing behind her. When she returned, she overheard him speaking with a client. "You know how it is," he said lightly. "She's not from this world. But I'm patient." "She's trying." The words hit harder than any slap could. Lena stood there frozen as the music swelled around her. People danced, champagne sparkled, the night glowed with luxury, and she realized she was invisible in her own life. just a trophy that didn't quite shine enough. As the night ended, Ethan placed a hand on her back, whispering, "Smile, love." "People are watching," she smiled. Not because she wanted to, but because she understood something now. The cage wasn't locked by him alone. She'd been holding it shut herself, hoping one day he'd see her as enough. When they got home, she walked through the long corridor in silence. Ethan was already on the phone, laughing about a deal. She slipped off her heels, her feet aching, and stared out at the skyline, glittering, endless, cold. In that moment, surrounded by everything she'd once thought was the dream, Lena finally saw the truth. She wasn't living in a palace. She was trapped in a glittering cage. The morning after the gala, Lena woke to sunlight spilling across the marble floors, warm light on a cold home. Ethan's side of the bed was already empty. From the balcony, she could hear his voice down below, sharp and commanding, directing staff as if the world existed only to serve him. She sat up slowly, her throat dry, her heart heavy with last night's humiliation. The memory replayed vividly, the laughter, the way Ethan's words sliced through her dignity, and the way everyone around him had smiled as if cruelty were sophistication. For the first time, she didn't feel sad. She felt hollow. When she entered the kitchen, Ethan was finishing his coffee. He barely looked up. "Morning," he said flatly, scrolling through his phone. "Ethan," she began softly, "about last night." He sighed, setting the cup down. "Lena, please don't start the day with drama." "It's not drama," she said, her voice trembling. "You humiliated me, Ethan, in front of everyone." He finally looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "You're overreacting. People joke, Lena. You need to learn to stop taking everything so personally." She stared at him, unable to find words. He continued, "You should be grateful for what you have. Do you know how many women would kill to live this life?" That sentence, "you should be grateful," hit her harder than anything else he'd ever said. Grateful for what? A husband who saw her as decoration? A home that felt like a museum? A life that silenced her? She stood there, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't love me, Ethan. You love the idea of being admired. And I was just part of that picture." He laughed coldly. "You sound ridiculous. Maybe you've been watching too many movies." Lena turned away, blinking back tears. The sound of his laughter followed her down the hallway like a shadow. She went into their bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. All around her were signs of the life he'd built. Silk curtains, expensive perfumes, a closet full of dresses he'd chosen. Not a single thing in that room had been hers by choice. For the first time, she realized she couldn't fix this. That night, she packed a small bag, just a few clothes, her worn leather wallet, and a notebook she'd kept hidden for years. Inside were pages filled with ideas, dreams, sketches, tiny fragments of a self she thought she'd lost. She'd written them late at night when Ethan was asleep, as a way to remind herself that her mind still belonged to her. She looked around one last time. The glass windows reflected her faint silhouette, fragile but alive. Then, without leaving a note, she slipped out the back door. The city felt strange after so long. The air wasn't scented with luxury perfumes or filled with quiet music. It was noisy, raw, real. She called her old college friend Maya, who picked up on the first ring. "Lena?" Maya's voice was both shocked and worried. I need somewhere to stay," Lena said quietly. "Of course. Come. No questions." When Lena arrived, she looked almost unrecognizable, hair loose, makeup smudged, carrying a small duffel bag. Maya hugged her tightly, no judgment, no pity. Just warmth. The kind Lena hadn't felt in years. They spent the night talking on the couch. Lena told her everything, the constant belittling, the control, the emptiness. When she finished, Maya just said, "You didn't leave too late, Lena. You left exactly when you were ready." The words settled in her heart like an anchor. Over the next few days, Ethan sent texts. At first they were cold. "You'll come back once you realize what you gave up." You're acting impulsively. Be mature. Then indifferent. Fine, stay gone if you want. But don't expect anything from me. She didn't respond to any of them. Every morning, Lena woke up on Maya's couch with sunlight filtering through cheap curtains. And for the first time, she breathed. No staff, no cameras, no perfection. Just the hum of the city outside and the sound of coffee brewing. But freedom came with fear, too. Her savings were limited. She had no job experience beyond charity events and managing Ethan's schedule. Yet, amid the panic, something stirred inside her. A faint pulse of determination. One evening, as she sat alone with her notebook, she ran her fingers over the pages filled with candle sketches and scent combinations. Memories rushed back. Her mother melting wax on a small stove, teaching her how each fragrance could tell a story. Scents are emotions people wear, her mother used to say. Lena stared at those words, and for the first time, she smiled. What if she could create something that wasn't just about luxury, but about comfort, warmth, and truth? Something real, unlike the artificial world she'd just escaped? Her heart began to beat faster. She tore out a blank page and started writing ideas. Candle names, packaging concepts, potential slogans. Homegrown luxury, she wrote in big letters. Luxury that feels like love. The clock ticked past midnight, but Lena didn't stop writing. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. When Maya came out for a glass of water and saw Lena scribbling passionately, she smiled. Something tells me, she said softly, this is your beginning. Lena looked up, eyes bright with a mix of exhaustion and hope. Maybe it is, she whispered. She turned toward the window. The city lights reflected on the glass, not as prison bars this time, but as stars scattered across her new horizon. For the first time in years, Lena wasn't running from something. She was running toward herself. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty. But for Lena, uncertainty was better than emptiness. She woke each morning on Maya's couch with the sunlight warming her face and the faint scent of old wood and coffee drifting through the apartment. It wasn't luxury, but it was life. One afternoon, she sat at the small kitchen table surrounded by her scattered notes and candle sketches. Lumina, she murmured, writing the word in bold letters at the top of a page. It meant light. That's what she wanted her new life to be, a small light that grew stronger in the dark. Maya leaned over her shoulder. That's beautiful, she said. What's it for? My business, Lena said, her voice uncertain but alive. Or at least, my dream of one. At first, the dream was just that. Fragile, uncertain, shaped by late-night brainstorming sessions and hope. Lena used the little money she had left to buy candle-making supplies, soy wax, wicks, essential oils, and glass jars from a discount shop. She worked on the kitchen counter, melting wax on a small stove while Maya teased. I swear, if you burn this place down, I'm telling everyone you used to be rich. They laughed. But every cent Lena created carried a piece of her soul. Vanilla for comfort, cedarwood for strength, jasmine for freedom. Each candle told a story she'd once been afraid to speak out loud. She started documenting her process on social media. Unfiltered photos, short captions, bits of her journey. One post read, I left a mansion to find myself. These candles remind me that real warmth doesn't come from money. It comes from meaning. At first, she got a few likes, a handful of comments. Then one night, a small lifestyle blogger shared her post, calling it the most honest luxury story you'll read this week. Within days, her page began to grow. Orders trickled in, not many, but enough to keep her working late into the night. Lena turned Maya's apartment into a workshop. The living room was stacked with jars, labels, and boxes. Wax splattered the countertops. The air smelled like lavender and honey. She'd fall asleep surrounded by half-finished candles, hands aching but heart full. Still, the climb wasn't easy. She made mistakes. Labels misprinted, scents that didn't set right, shipping delays that made customers angry. There were nights she cried quietly, terrified that she'd fail. Maya would sit beside her with tea, whispering, "You've come too far to quit now." Lena pushed on. She spent hours studying marketing tutorials, learning how to photograph products, write engaging captions, and understand what people connected with emotionally. Her followers didn't just love her candles, they loved her story. She wasn't pretending to be perfect. She was building something real from the ground up. Months passed, and Lumina Essence started gaining traction. A boutique in downtown Los Angeles reached out, asking to stock her products for a trial month. When Lena received the message, she stared at her phone in disbelief. "I told you," Maya said, grinning. "People can feel authenticity. You're giving them what money can't buy." The day Lena delivered her candles to the boutique, she wore a simple white shirt and jeans. As she arranged her display, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass shelf, tired but radiant. She smiled, realizing she didn't need designer gowns or socialite parties. She had purpose. When the first wholesale order sold out in less than a week, Lena cried again, this time out of joy. She called her mother, who still lived in her small hometown, and told her everything. Her mother's voice trembled through the phone. "I always knew your heart would lead you somewhere special, sweetheart." That night, Lena sat by the window watching the city lights. She thought of Ethan, of the words he'd said, "You'll never fit into my world." Maybe he was right. She didn't fit into his world, but now she was building her own. She looked at her notebook, now filled with new ideas, expansion plans, new fragrances, even a potential website design. Each note was a step toward something she'd never thought possible: freedom, identity, pride. A few weeks later, she received an invitation to a local business event, a small gathering of women entrepreneurs. Nervous but excited, she attended with a few of her candles in a woven basket. During her turn to introduce herself, she said softly, "My name is Lena Lennox, founder of Lumina Essence. I started with nothing but a kitchen stove and a dream, and today, I'm here to light a path for others who felt small." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. For the first time, Lena didn't shrink under the attention. She stood taller. Afterward, several women came to her, sharing their own stories of starting over. They didn't see her as Ethan's ex or as someone trying to belong. They saw her as an inspiration, a woman who dared to rebuild. That night, as Lena walked home, the city didn't feel intimidating anymore. It pulsed with life, and she felt connected to every light in every window. She knew there were still challenges ahead, bills to pay, production issues to solve, but she wasn't afraid. She was no longer defined by what she'd lost. She was defined by what she was becoming, and when she lit one of her own candles before bed, its soft flame flickered against the walls, casting light on a woman who had finally found her way out of the dark. 2 years after Lena first melted wax on Maya's kitchen stove, the faint scent of lavender and sandalwood now filled Lumina Essence's flagship studio, her studio, a sunlit space nestled in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. What had started with a single notebook and a few borrowed jars had grown into something far beyond her imagination. The walls were lined with elegant glass shelves showcasing rows of minimalist candle jars, each engraved with Lumina's signature phrase, "Light that remembers." The studio's aesthetic was warm and modern, soft wood tones, gentle lighting, and small potted plants. It wasn't extravagant, but it radiated the kind of authenticity that made people linger. Customers didn't just come to buy candles, they came to feel something. That morning, Lena stood near the window, sipping coffee while reviewing emails on her tablet. Her assistant, Aria, approached, grinning. "You're trending again," she said. "A lifestyle magazine just called Lumina Essence, the brand redefining luxury with heart." Lena smiled in disbelief. Even now, success still surprised her, not because she doubted her work, but because she'd spent years being told she wasn't enough. When Aria left to handle packaging, Lena glanced at her reflection in the studio window, the same way she used to stare at her reflection in Ethan's mansion. But now her reflection looked back at her with quiet strength. Her hair was shorter, her posture taller, her smile real. A chime sounded from the front door as a journalist and her photographer entered. Lena recognized them instantly. They were from Business Elegance Weekly, a magazine that once featured Ethan on its cover under the headline, "The Man Who Defines Modern Success." As they set up their equipment, the journalist said warmly, "We're thrilled to finally meet the woman behind Lumina Essence. Your story has become, well, something of a phenomenon." Lena smiled graciously. "Thank you. I'm just grateful people connect with what we create." During the interview, they asked about her inspiration, her journey, and her definition of luxury. She paused thoughtfully before answering. "For a long time," she said softly, "I thought luxury was about perfection, about having what others couldn't. But real luxury is peace. It's self-worth. It's knowing you can lose everything and still be whole." The journalist nodded, visibly moved. "That's powerful," she said. When the issue was published, the feature titled "The Woman Who Redefined Luxury" went viral. Orders skyrocketed. Celebrities posted Lumina candles on social media, praising their comforting simplicity. One caption read, "These candles feel like therapy." Soon, boutiques from New York to London wanted her products. Investors called. Offers flooded in. Collaborations, interviews, brand deals. But Lena was careful. She accepted only what aligned with her values. "Growth is important," she told Arya, "but not at the cost of the soul." Then came the moment she hadn't expected. The City Gala. The same type of event she once attended as a silent accessory. This time she was invited as a guest of honor. The venue was opulent, chandeliers, champagne, designer gowns, eerily reminiscent of her past life. As Lena stepped out of her car, photographers called her name, flashes lighting up the night. Her white silk gown flowed effortlessly as she walked the red carpet, her head held high. The confidence she exuded wasn't loud or forced. It was earned. Inside, she mingled with fellow entrepreneurs, artists, and journalists. Every handshake was genuine, every compliment sincere. She was no longer pretending to belong. She did. As she chatted with a fashion editor, her eyes caught something across the room. Ethan. He stood near the bar. A drink in hand, his once glossy confidence dimmed. The tailored suit couldn't hide the subtle slump in his shoulders. His company had made headlines months ago. Financial losses, internal disputes, failed expansions. It wasn't public collapse, but enough to dent his empire. Their eyes met for the first time in years. For a brief second, she felt her breath catch, not from emotion, but from memory. Then she smiled politely and turned back to her conversation. Later that night, as she gave her speech on stage, she looked out over the glittering audience, the very type of crowd that once made her feel invisible. "I used to think success was measured by what others thought of you," she said. "But I learned that real success is quiet. It doesn't demand to be seen. It shines because it's true." Applause filled the hall. Somewhere in the back, Ethan watched silently, his face unreadable. When the event ended, Lena stepped outside into the cool night air. Her driver opened the car door, but before getting in, she turned to look at the skyline, the same city where she'd once felt trapped. Now it felt like hers. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Articles, photos, congratulations. The internet called her the self-made queen of conscious luxury. Ethan saw it too. Sitting in his glass office, surrounded by silence, he scrolled through the feature, his jaw tightening as he read the quote that ended the piece. "True luxury begins when you stop needing validation." He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. The woman he once dismissed, the one he said would never fit into his world, now had a world of her own. Meanwhile, Lena was already back in her studio, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in work. She smiled as she poured wax into a new line of candles, a collection she decided to name Rise. Because this was what rising looked like. Not revenge, not noise, but quiet, unstoppable light. The next few months passed in a blur of interviews, expansion meetings, and travel. Lena's life had transformed into something she once couldn't have imagined. Not glamorous in the hollow way it used to be, but rich with purpose. Lumina Essence had opened stores in 3 major cities, and her team had grown from 2 people to 40. She wasn't just creating candles anymore. She was building a legacy. But even amid the success, there were moments when old memories slipped through, not in longing, but in reflection. Sometimes she'd drive past the parts of town where Ethan's world once revolved. His old office building, the restaurant where they had their first date, the hotel ballroom where he humiliated her. Each place reminded her of how far she'd come, and how much she'd rebuilt from the ruins he left her in. One crisp autumn evening, as she was preparing to leave her new Los Angeles headquarters, Arya approached with a hesitant look. "Lena, there's something you should see." She handed over a glossy event invitation embossed with gold lettering, the annual Westbridge Business Gala. Below, in elegant script, it read, "Honoring visionaries in modern entrepreneurship, including Ethan Lennox, Lennox Real Estate Holdings, and Lena Lennox, Lumina Essence." Lena froze for a moment, eyes on the 2 names side by side, her past and her present. The irony was poetic. "Guess the universe has a sense of humor," she murmured with a faint smile. Arya watched her carefully. "You don't have to go if you're not ready." But Lena shook her head. "No, I think I am." The night of the gala arrived with soft rain that shimmered under the city lights. Lena stepped out of her car wearing a sleek black gown, simple, timeless, powerful. Her hair was swept back, a diamond pin glinting near her temple. She wasn't dressing to impress anyone tonight. She was dressing to remember who she'd become. Inside, the grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and murmured conversations. Waiters floated by with champagne, the air filled with perfume and ambition. Lena greeted fellow entrepreneurs, her presence magnetic. Calm, composed, impossible to ignore. Then, as she turned toward the main hall, she saw him. Ethan. He stood near the bar, older now, his confidence replaced by something quieter, perhaps humility, perhaps regret. His once meticulously styled hair was slightly thinner, his expression a little worn. When he noticed her, his eyes widened, a flicker of something crossing his face. Disbelief, maybe awe. Their eyes met for the first time in nearly 5 years. For a moment, the room seemed to fade. Then Ethan straightened his jacket and walked toward her. "Lena?" he said, his voice low but careful, as if afraid she might vanish. "It's been a long time." "It has," she replied evenly. "How have you been?" He gave a small, ironic laugh. "Not quite as well as you, it seems." "I've been reading about Lumina Essence." "Congratulations, it's impressive." "Thank you," she said simply. There was an awkward pause, heavy with unspoken history. Ethan finally sighed, his tone softening. "You look incredible. I always knew you had potential." Lena smiled, not bitterly, but with the calm of someone who'd healed. "No, you didn't," she said gently. "But I did." For a moment, his facade cracked. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something sadder. Realization. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "And about a lot of things." Lena tilted her head, studying him. "We were both wrong," she said. "I thought love meant shrinking to fit someone's expectations. Turns out it means expanding into your own." He looked down, speechless. The Ethan she once knew would have had a cutting comeback ready. But tonight he had none. Just silence. A photographer approached them awkwardly. "Mr. Lennox, Ms. Lennox, can I get a picture of the 2 of you together?" Lena smiled politely. "It's Ms. Lennox no longer," she corrected. "It's Ms. Hartley, her maiden name." She turned toward the photographer and said kindly, "Maybe next time." Then she walked away before Ethan could respond. He watched her go, poised, confident, untouchable. The woman he once controlled now carried herself with a strength that needed no validation. Later that night, as Lena stepped outside the ballroom, The rain had stopped. The city glistened under the streetlights, and her car waited by the curb. As she reached for the door, a young journalist called out, "Ms. Hartley!" "Just a quick quote. What drives your success?" Lena paused, smiling softly. "Peace," she said. "And the freedom to be myself." The journalist nodded, scribbling quickly. "Beautiful. Thank you." As her car pulled away, Lena glanced out the window. Through the rain-slicked glass, she caught a final glimpse of Ethan standing at the entrance, watching her leave. For a brief second, their eyes met again. A silent goodbye this time. No resentment, no revenge. Just closure. Inside the car, her assistant handed her a tablet showing Lumina Essence's newest store opening in New York. Lena smiled as she looked at the photos, shelves glowing under soft lights. Customers holding candles with the word "Rise" etched into the glass. Ethan had once told her she'd never match his status. Now, she lived beyond it. Not in wealth, but in wholeness. She leaned back against the seat, exhaling deeply as the city lights blurred past. Somewhere inside, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. She hadn't just survived him. She had outgrown the version of herself who ever needed his approval. The morning after the gala, Lena woke to sunlight streaming through her floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched below, quiet, golden, alive. She sat up in bed, letting the moment sink in. 5 years ago, she had woken up in that same city with nothing. No home, no husband, no direction. Now she had built a life entirely on her own terms. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Aria. New York store launch was a success. Sold out in 6 hours. Lena smiled. She typed back, "Couldn't have done it without you. Let's meet this evening. I have an idea." She stepped into her kitchen, minimalist, serene, and poured herself coffee. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, one of her own candle blends. It wasn't about luxury anymore. It was about peace. Every object in her space had meaning. Every scent, every sound reminded her of freedom. Later that afternoon, Lena met Aria and 2 senior managers at the new Lumina studio, an airy workspace filled with soft light, raw wood, and plants. On the wall hung a quote that had become their brand's mantra: "The brightest light is the one we create after darkness." Aria, animated as always, clicked through a presentation. "We've had requests from Europe. Paris, Berlin, Stockholm. We could go global by next year." Lena listened, her mind already turning. "I don't want Lumina Essence to just be another luxury brand," she said. "I want it to stand for resilience. Every product should tell a story of women who rebuilt, who rose." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew her own story was the heartbeat of the company. "We could start a foundation," Aria suggested. "Support small women-owned businesses. Maybe fund creative startups?" Lena's eyes lit up. "Yes, the Rise Project. We'll mentor women who were told they couldn't, who were dismissed, like I was." For a moment, she felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't just business anymore. It was healing, multiplied. That evening, Lena attended the opening of an art exhibit her company had sponsored, Light After the Storm. The gallery was filled with photographs and installations from women around the world. Each piece reflected resilience, rebirth, and transformation. As she walked through the space, people greeted her, not as Ethan Lennox's ex-wife, but as Lena Hartley, founder, creator, and visionary. The label she once clung to for identity had dissolved. Now her name stood on its own, glowing quietly beneath the spotlight. Toward the end of the night, a young woman approached her. She looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Hartley?" she asked softly. "I just wanted to thank you. Your story, it helped me leave someone who made me feel small. Now I'm starting my own jewelry line." Lena felt her chest tighten with emotion. She reached out and took the woman's hand. "You don't need anyone's permission to shine," she said. "You already are." As the woman smiled and walked away, Lena realized something profound. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a spark lighting others, Weeks turned into months, and Lumina Essence's growth became unstoppable. Magazine covers, interviews, invitations, they came one after another. Yet Lena no longer measured her worth in headlines or bank balances. Her peace came from knowing who she was and what she had built from nothing. One morning, she received an unexpected envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Lena, I saw your interview last week. You've become everything I once said you couldn't be." "I'm sorry." She stared at it for a long moment. No anger, no satisfaction, just quiet understanding. Then she folded the note, slipped it into her journal, and closed it gently. Some stories didn't need revisiting. Some chapters were meant to end gracefully. Months later, Lena stood on the balcony of her mountain home, overlooking the valley below. The air smelled of pine and rain. She held a candle from her own line. Reclaim. She lit it, watching the flame dance against the evening sky. In the distance, city lights shimmered like memories. Somewhere in that maze of glass and noise, her old life still existed, a symbol of what she had outgrown. But here, surrounded by silence and air so clean it stung her lungs, Lena finally understood the truth she'd been chasing all along. Luxury isn't wealth. It's peace. It's waking up without fear. It's walking away and not looking back. She whispered softly to herself, "I'm finally home." And as the flame flickered, the candle's scent, cedar, amber, and hope, filled the air. She smiled. Not the smile of triumph, but of calm, unshakable joy. Because she had proven something not to Ethan, not to the world, but to herself. She was never beneath anyone's status. She had always been enough, and now she lived beyond luxury, in the quiet, golden freedom she created with her own hands.